Now, I think it goes without saying that the most controversial thing done thus far in the Disney era of Star Wars has been making Luke Skywalker a quote-unquote dejected hermit in The Last Jedi. It's one of those things that some fans can and will argue about defending it or attacking it till the end of time, with some saying it was a natural and inevitable progression of the character given everything we'd seen Luke go through in the previous parts of the story, that it was all completely consistent, while others say pretty much the exact opposite, that given everything he'd been through in other parts of the story, he'd never run and hide from his friends and family, he'd never, even for a split second, contemplate killing his nephew in his sleep, that it's also inconsistent that he'd have to be a different character entirely, like Jake Skywalker, for example. And no matter what side of the debate you fall on, or if maybe you fall in the middle and just wish there was no debate around it at all, it is interesting to note that another fan-favorite character is about to get a very similar treatment, that we're about to see Obi-Wan Kenobi get his own series where he'll also be a sort of quote-unquote dejected hermit, at least according to recent comments made both by Ewan McGregor and Kathleen Kennedy, with Ewan saying that we find Obi-Wan at the beginning of our story rather broken and faithless and beaten, somewhat given up. He also said that he's a broken man after what happened with the Jedi Order at the end of Episode 3, but also what happened with Anakin, that he lost him to the dark side. He feels an enormous amount of responsibility for that and guilt. We also then had Kathleen Kennedy say that we're looking ultimately to make a hopeful, uplifting story, and it's tricky when you're starting with a character in the state that Obi-Wan would be in coming off Revenge of the Sith. That's a pretty bleak period of time. Okay, and though some fans will, and I have seen, make the case or argument that Obi-Wan would not be a broken man after Episode 3, that he was a fully trained Jedi Master who would never lose his way or his faith in the Order, and though I personally don't think he is or should be as sort of, shall we say, down and defeated as Luke was in The Last Jedi, there is actually some evidence in A New Hope to suggest his faith in the Jedi was tested during his almost 20 years alone in the desert of Tatooine.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
And first of all, yes, we have to keep in mind just when this line was written, which is back when George Lucas didn't have the full story figured out or mapped out just yet. He didn't know what the prequels were exactly going to look like. In other words, he wasn't originally trying to imply anything significant or profound here, that somewhere along the way Obi-Wan had lost his faith in the Jedi and no longer considered himself one of them. It's really just a line meant to quickly and easily convey that both he, Obi-Wan, and Luke's father, who, keep in mind, wasn't even Vader at this time or during the making of this particular film, that they'd once been something called a Jedi, but now they are all but extinct. It makes things feel that much more dire for the galaxy and hence urgent for the story. Nevertheless, it has become an interesting line to think about and examine, to try and make sense of and maybe add some significance to after the fact, especially with the series coming up. Though yeah, we could just look at it as a case of Obi-Wan spending so much time pretending not to be a Jedi, calling himself Ben and forgetting all about Obi-Wan or trying to hide his real identity, that he doesn't even really exactly realize what he's saying to Luke here. But I'd argue that's pretty unlikely considering he's not only telling Luke all about the Jedi, but he is, or will try to, convince him to become one, which means he's likely very consciously aware of exactly what he's saying to Luke to nudge him in the right direction or down the right path. Which then implies he said he used to be a Jedi intentionally for some reason, and certainly not because he thinks they should end or anything like that. Again, he's trying to convince Luke to become one and to get the Death Star plans to the rebellion and all of that. So I don't think what he said is in any way a type of underhanded slight against the Jedi. Most likely, I think, or what would make the most sense or make for the best story, is if Obi-Wan thinks he's become something beyond just a Jedi, that at some point in the past 20 years he has completed his training with Qui-Gon Jinn and is now on the verge of becoming something else entirely, which is of course a Force ghost. He's in the last leg of his mortal journey, while starting Luke down his own path to become a Jedi and to restart the Order. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that if this series isn't in large part about Kenobi becoming a Force ghost, or should I say trying to commune with Qui-Gon Jinn to begin his training so that he'll be the character we see in A New Hope, someone ready to die and move on and inspire Luke in the process, then I'll almost certainly be disappointed with the series on some level, because I just think that's not only where the story is, but that's the only good reason to tell a story here, that this is a crossroads in his life, that this is Kenobi grappling with his past in order to become what he needs to be in the future. That the series is not just an excuse for the rematch of the century with Darth Vader. And sure, such a rematch can theoretically work as long as it makes sense and fits into the larger story, fits into him letting go of his anger and or his hatred towards Anakin, his negative attachments, you could say. I mean, it could even be some sort of strange vision of him fighting Vader and realizing he cannot defeat him, and the harder he tries, the harder he fights, the more frustrated he becomes, the further away from letting go of his hate he is. And do keep in mind, in Clone Wars, in the Season 6 Yoda arc, we learn the key to becoming a Force Ghost, or one of them, is letting go of all of your fear, anger, and attachments. So him fighting against Vader in this vision, only to realize he cannot defeat him because he's just getting angrier, that someone else must be the one to do it, which is of course Luke, not only fits in with his belief in Luke, that we'll see later on, but also why he essentially dies for him in A New Hope, and why that is the moment he becomes a Force Ghost, because it is the moment he lets go of everything. Basically, as I've talked about before, I want this to be an introspect with meaning for the character, not a surface-level spectacle. And yeah, spectacle is absolutely a part of Star Wars. It's been a big and important part of it since literally the very first scene, where a Star Destroyer flew over our heads and changed the lives of many, not to mention the future of cinema. But it's the characters that keep people coming back for more. They are what makes Star Wars great, and what most truly care about. Which is why so many were upset about the way Luke was handled in The Last Jedi. They care a great deal about the character and couldn't understand what exactly broke him, not when last we see him, which is at the end of Return of the Jedi. He's not only helped the rebellion be victorious, but he's just saved his father from the dark side and defeated the Sith in the process, and he's now on the verge of bringing the Jedi Order back to prominence. To put it mildly, the original trilogy ends on an up note for Luke Skywalker, with him and his friends essentially achieving total victory and everything is all smiles in the end. So if he's going to be down next time we see him, if the galaxy is going to be in turmoil once more and we don't have Luke around to stop it, we need an explanation as to why he's not around trying to do anything about it. Again, especially when you consider what he was like when we last saw him, that he'd already faced his hardest and darkest trials in The Empire Strikes Back and had overcome them. The opposite is then true for Obi-Wan Kenobi and the prequels. Everything there ends pretty horribly for our heroes, and especially Kenobi, with the Jedi defeated and the Empire on the rise, with the Sith returning to power, and with Anakin, his brother, essentially having fallen to the dark side and having helped bring pretty much all of that bad stuff about. We are, or shouldn't be, surprised that all had an impact of some kind on Obi-Wan, and that maybe he is having some sort of crisis of faith, especially while he spends years alone in the desert protecting the child of the student and brother he no doubt feels he has failed, and that again is responsible for all of these horrible things. And look, I'm not saying he's going to be Luke in The Last Jedi levels of broken, for better or worse. Heck, the trailer for Kenobi implies that won't be the case, that what will lure Kenobi out is that he can't stop himself from being a Jedi and doing good things, that it is an itch he must scratch. Though apparently the Grand Inquisitor who says all that has never met Jake Skywalker, who felt no such itch to scratch and was just fine giving up on the Jedi. But anyway, jokes aside, and considering where we last saw Kenobi, what had happened to him in the last part of the story, or in Revenge of the Sith, I should say, I don't really have a problem with Kenobi being broken to some degree in this series. And it'd almost be disappointing or frustrating if he wasn't, if what happened to Anakin wasn't bothering him at all, if he'd just gotten over it with no struggle whatsoever. I mean, we've all seen the prequels, right? Or I'm assuming pretty much everyone watching this has seen the prequels at some point. And most of us have also seen the Clone Wars, or at the very least know some of those stories and how it shows Anakin and Obi-Wan together as brothers. We know how important they were to each other, how much Obi-Wan cared about Anakin and vice versa. And we also care a great deal about Anakin and Obi-Wan and their relationship as well. And so, having seen all that, knowing and caring about that story so much, we of course wouldn't be surprised or upset to see it has lingering effects on Kenobi, and maybe some pretty significant ones. Again, we'd be maybe disappointed if it didn't. We'd find it hard to believe, Jedi Master and years of training or not, that Obi-Wan hadn't struggled at all with any of it if he just stopped caring about Anakin overnight and went on with his life. The opposite is then the problem with Luke and Ben Solo and why The Last Jedi doesn't work as well or doesn't work for as many fans. And that's because we never see Luke and Ben together. We literally never see even a moment of them or their relationship, what it may or may not mean to each of them, before it's then used to break Luke and to be the motivation or the moment that Ben truly embraces the dark side and becomes Kylo Ren. Not to mention, when we see this breaking of Luke Skywalker, Ben Solo means little to us, the audience, at that point, outside of just being the son of Han and Leia. Basically, we know Anakin far better than we knew Ben Solo. We don't understand exactly what Ben is to Luke. We never ever see it. Sure, it's his nephew, and we know how much Luke cares about his family. We can understand why it perhaps had the impact it did, but we saw Anakin become Obi-Wan's brother. We never saw what Ben became to Luke. And so we need no further explanation or context to explain some level of broken Kenobi in this series. Again, we would kind of expect it and maybe be disappointed if Kenobi is at the point where, yeah, didn't really care that much about Anakin, I've moved on and I am doing much better these days. But we have not one shred of context, not one moment of them together, at least in the films, to explain why Luke was so devastated by his nephew Ben. We just have to assume pretty much everything. And the thing is, if there was another trilogy between the original and the sequels, one that showed Ben and Luke together, where Luke becomes maybe almost a father to him, one that Han simply couldn't be because he could never quite understand what was going on with Ben, everything with the Force I'm talking about. If we'd seen that relationship built up before it was used to break Luke and to turn Kylo to the dark side, well, it may have worked. That story may have been, albeit a bit redundant perhaps, but it could have been a fantastic story. Not saying that would have been the story I or many fans would have hoped to have seen out of Luke post-Return of the Jedi, only that I've never said or would say that Luke is completely infallible and nothing ever could break him. We all have a breaking point somewhere, and the problem with breaking a character like Luke is that in the eyes of many, he is a symbol of hope and perseverance. You need more than a flashback to do it. You need more than a flashback to break what is seen as the unbreakable character. Whereas again, with Kenobi, the story for that is already in place. It's already there. It's been told. And we might even think a bit less of Obi-Wan and his relationship with Anakin if it hadn't hurt him so much. Which is to say nothing for anything else that Kenobi would be upset with Anakin about. That he maybe was unhappy that he gave up his relationship with Satine. That Obi-Wan could be living a completely different life on another planet somewhere with Satine if he hadn't stuck to his Jedi ideals. Even though, yes, he did say he would give up and leave the Order for her. But then there's Anakin, who didn't want to make such a choice, didn't want to make any sort of sacrifice, and tried to be both a Jedi and to have Padme at the same time. And perhaps Obi-Wan is a bit resentful that Anakin would not make such a choice. And I sure hope that's something that gets touched on in the Kenobi series. There is a lot to explore between these two characters because a lot has been set up, where again, between Ben and Luke, there's nothing there but our assumptions and what they want us to believe based off of one flashback, which isn't to say you can't enjoy the sequels, as I always say, but if we're being honest about it, one just has the backstory and one does not. So one is going to be more accepted by most than the other one. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Does a broken Kenobi make sense for this series, or do you want to see him be strong and having gotten over Anakin and everything with that already? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.